Farming is a hard profession. Physically taxing, work never ending, subject to the whims of nature, and not well compensated for most. Plus, there's the additional pressure that this land may have been in your family for generations. It's up to you to keep it productive. And on top of that, it can be lonely and isolating at times. Mental health is a big issue on the farm, and researchers at Cornell are trying to make it easier to talk about. That's today's story of the day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Morja Wealth Management, serving the North Country for 3 generations. MorjaWM.com. Securities offered through Hightower Securities, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC. Hightower is an SEC-registered investment advisor.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Tuesday, January 7th. First up, a leading voice in the Adirondacks has died. Betsy Falwell was 72 years old. She was the longtime editor of Adirondack Life magazine. Starting there as an assistant director in 1989, she worked there until her retirement in 2021. More recently, she and her husband helped open a diner in Blue Mountain Lake. She's lived in Blue Mountain Lake for nearly 50 years. She also published a book called Short Carries, a collection of essays that chronicle her life and love of the Adirondack Park. Tomorrow on Story of the Day, we'll have a remembrance of Betsy Falwell in the words of those who knew and loved her. A new law in New York promises to make oil and gas companies pay for part of the harm caused by climate change. But as Rebecca Rettelmeyer reports for the New York Public News Network, the legislation is expected to face legal challenges before it raises any money.
The Climate Change Superfund Act is meant to raise over $3 billion annually from oil and gas companies to fund projects that help the state withstand the effects of climate change, like extreme weather and floods. Governor Kathy Hochul signed the bill during the final days of last year. But it will likely face a tough fight in court, says Martin Lockman, a climate law fellow at the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia University.
It's enormously financially significant for the oil and gas industry. So I would expect them to spare no expense in opposing these bills.
Lockman says legal questions over the bill largely focus on whether a state has the authority to penalize a company for air pollution that happens elsewhere. Historically, such issues have been controlled by the federal government. New York is the second state to pass a Climate Superfund Act, after Vermont. Last week, industry groups filed a lawsuit against Vermont over its version of the bill. One of the plaintiffs, the American Petroleum Institute, has criticized New York's version as well. Blair Horner is a senior policy director at the New York Public Interest Research Group, which helped craft the legislation. He says the bill was written with the understanding that it would have to overcome legal challenges.
You never know in advance what the courts are going to do. But we did do our homework in the very beginning of this to make sure that we were on solid ground to advance this legislation.
To Horner, the stakes are high as the cost of damages from climate change is expected to grow.
From a New Yorker's point of view, this is a long-term problem. Every year it's just going to keep getting worse. The price tag for New York taxpayers will just keep going up.
The bill lays out a multi-year timeline for the state to determine which oil and gas companies must pay and how much they are responsible for. In Ithaca, I'm Rebecca Rettelmeyer for the New York Public News Network.
New York congressional Republicans say they'll talk state and local tax deductions in an upcoming meeting with President-elect Donald Trump. The meeting will include Long Island Congressman Nick Lalata and Andrew Garbarino. It's unclear if North Country Representatives Elise Stefanik and Claudia Tenney will also be at the meeting. New York Republicans say they want more federal deductions on state and local taxes, also known as SALT. Republicans capped SALT deductions at $10,000 during the first Trump administration. States like New York and New Jersey were most negatively affected by the cap and are at odds with other Republicans over raising the limit. Governor Kathy Hochul has proposed an historic expansion of New York's child tax credit. It's the second proposal of what she's calling her affordability agenda for 2025. The New York Democrat spoke at a New York City YMCA yesterday, part of a preview of her State of the State address, which is next Tuesday. Hochul says she wants to triple the tax credit for babies and toddlers.
For the littlest ones, newborn to 3, We're going to increase the maximum benefit from $330 now to $1,000. That's tripling the maximum benefit for our youngest New Yorkers.
The proposal would increase the credit for children age 4 to 16 to $500 per child. This is different from the federal child tax credit, which was increased significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic, but that expansion expired in 2021. Hochul says 1.6 million parents and 2.7 million children in New York would stand to benefit from the proposed state expansion. Hochul will outline her full agenda when she delivers her State of the State address on January 14th. This next story discusses suicide. It's about 4 minutes long. Farmers are at a much higher risk to die by suicide than the general public. A new free course through Cornell University is teaching people how to support their rural neighbors during mental health challenges. Catherine Wheeler reports.
Farming might be an idealistic profession for some, being outside, working with animals, growing food for our communities.
A lot of people think that farming is a wonderful way of life and they want to jump right in and take it on. It's one of the most stressful jobs a person can have.
That's Becky Wiseman. She's a licensed clinical social worker who works with New York FarmNet. That's a program that helps farmers with their businesses and personal challenges related to their farms. Wiseman says farming can be a double whammy for mental health challenges. First, the job has a lot of stressors. Long days working alone, an ever-changing economy, the fickleness of caring for plants and livestock in unpredictable weather. And on top of that, rural communities often lack robust mental health care services.
Research has shown that rural communities have approximately 65% higher rate of suicide in their population compared to urban areas.
According to the National Rural Health Association, the suicide rate for farmers is nearly 3.5 times higher than the rate for the general public. Wiseman says there are a few factors that contribute to that.
It's a statistic that's likely exacerbated by those experiencing financial instability and isolation. Like I say, farmers work alone. They spend long hours alone, isolate, feel the need to do it themselves, be strong.
Wiseman says there can also be a stigma for getting help. She says that's why a collaboration with Cornell, the mental health nonprofit Rural Minds, and New York FarmNet wants to prepare more people to navigate conversations around mental health, especially for the folks who are more likely to be around farmers, like veterinarians or other ag-related businesses. She says the free hour-long course reviews the warning signs that a person is struggling. Wiseman says it's things like noticing if a person's appearance or behavior has changed recently.
Are they not going about their daily routines, such as if you know Farmer John goes to the coffee shop every morning at 7 o'clock and he's not there for a few days, reaching out to him and saying, hey, I missed you. Not, oh, God, he's probably busy, but being attentive to when a person changes their behaviors.
Wiseman says the key is reaching out to neighbors and being willing to ask questions and listen. She says it could be one of the most important things that we do.
It's always important to never be afraid to ask somebody, have you thought of hurting yourself? Have you thought of suicide? Because what happens is many people, they won't talk about that because they think if they ask that question, that will automatically have the person act on their thoughts, which is just the opposite of what happens. When you ask somebody, they're relieved that somebody can actually put words to what they're feeling and open up the discussion.
Wiseman says the online course is open to anyone, whether you work with farmers or not. She says the goal is open up a conversation and to help community members feel less alone. If you or someone you know is in crisis, call or text the National Suicide Crisis Lifeline at 988. Catherine Wheeler, North Country Public Radio.
We have more news all the time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Tim Ellifritz of Johnsburg and Patricia Julian of Burlington. I'm David Summerstein, North Country Public Radio.